well, you probably know from different facts. I was with my goddaughter and her husband, and they go to ELC in Christiansburg outside of Virginia Tech. And they told me about Lutheran World Foundation, which has a hospital, Augusta, on the Mount of Olives. And so I Googled it, and they've been treating refugees from the Gaza, children. So it's really nice. So yeah, Lutheran World Foundation, a multi-denomination type thing. But
that's even better.
Yeah. Well, the ELC has relationships with other denominations, but their minister is a new grad, graduated from SIM, got this position, got married, and bought a house.
Wow.
So busy. So they're in like, where are we and what do I do? But really charming man and his wife. And he went to Israel a year or two ago, and so I'm going to send him some of the little crosses I had left.
Oh, nice.
And stuff for his people.
Nice.
Very nice. It was delightful service.
Oh, I'm sure it would. It would be.
In among the wineries.
Had a nice service, a little bit of wine. Sure you have a good time.
Okie doke. We are ready to begin for our recap from chapter 15, verses 20 to 32, where Jesus is crucified. So we'll start with the prayer and then jump into the recap. We pray. Gracious Lord, be with us in our class again this day, we pray, that you might open our hearts, open our lives to you. May your word take root and grow in us to increase our faith in you and increase our understanding of exactly what happened and all that means for us. We ask this in your most precious name. Amen. So last week we went through Jesus' crucifixion, and this week we'll go to his death and burial. Next week then we'll do resurrection, and so we have ways to go. Number one, this lesson, the whole Jesus crucified, death, and buried, the emphasis seems to be on Jesus' fulfillment of Jesus' words and his promises and fulfillment of the Old Testament scriptures. That seems to be the big point. And you can look at the passages from Isaiah and Psalms in particular. Number two is interesting to me. The scene is vividly described. It's briefly described too, it seems to me. And what's interesting as well is that since the inhabitants of Rome, they know all about crucifixion, they don't go into a whole lot of great detail about that. Instead, it's just some basics of it instead. And number three is we talked about irony. There's a lot of irony last week. There's more irony this week as well. That seems to be a very interesting point. Number five, pressed into service. This is what the fellow, remember, the Simon of Cyrene is pressed into service. The text that we used was forced. It's actually from an official word that means that it would be like you're chosen and you don't have choice in it, because remember, Jesus talked about that too. If you're asked to carry the burden 1 mile, carry it 2 type thing, it's that same thing. You could be impressed into service by a Roman for that, and I would suggest you don't say no, because it may have dire consequences for you if it does. Number 7, carrying the cross. Now, it's interesting to me that Simon is mentioned by name, as are his sons Alexander and Rufus. Now, to me, it says that somehow these folks, somebody in that group was known by the first people who read this. So maybe they were in Rome by then. I don't know. It's interesting that I guess I'm thinking they have to have some knowledge of who these people are. Number 8, I'm going to keep going until you stop me. This is from verse 22. Golgotha. You can see the words there. Head is what it means. And it's interesting. I don't know if we mentioned this last week about Calvary. Comes from Latin calvaria, from calvus, bear, and aria. I guess we did talk about aria, because I thought that was a type of song or something, right? An aria, which is a place, so it's a bare place, which is pretty accurate for what that place was like. Number 9, mixed with myrrh. Smyrnizo. Sorry, I'll get it out yet. I'll spit it out. To flavor or drug with myrrh. Best thing that we could figure out is it has a deadening effect of pain, and so this would be given to them, but you'll notice that Jesus does not take it. Number 10 speaks about that, and people try to come up with a reason Jesus didn't take it. The two most likely, to me, it would be that he doesn't wish to take advantage of the drugging effects. He wants to experience all of it. Now me, I would be a coward and I'd want to have all of it. However, if you take that, it would be less, we'll find today again that Jesus is very different from the usual person who was crucified, because oftentimes they became unconscious, they didn't speak a whole lot, and Jesus is the exact opposite, and that's one reason that the centurion is so surprised by him, because of how he was in this, because he responded, he was awake, he shouted out very loudly. So Jesus didn't want that. And then secondly, if you remember from Mark 14:25, where Jesus says, I will not again drink of the cup of the vine until, and so this could be another reason as well. Number 11, crucified. Again, not a lot of detail is given. Roman Christians would understand what crucifixion is about. They knew it. They saw people having it at all. And isn't it interesting that we wear crosses? You know, this is a sign of a terrible way to die. Isn't it interesting that we wear that? I've never seen, I remember this argument before, I've never seen a little necklace that you could wear of an electric chair or of a needle, that's used for that. Never saw that, but we wear the other. Isn't it interesting? I don't know. Okay. Oh, number 12. I wasn't going to talk about that, but today's service where the casting of lots was used to choose Matthias, and here the casting of lots. Just an odd little interesting point. Let's see. Oh, number 15 and 16 talk about the time. Some people have concerns because of the timing mentioned, that it seems different in Mark than others. I'm not really going to be concerned about it. If you are, I can give you some sources. You can read hundreds of pages on it. Seems to me that they're using a different counting system, or they're trying to make a different point. On number 16, this was a kind of a cute one. The first bullet point there under number 16, early fathers, it's church fathers, suggested that the written signifiers from the numerals 3 and 6 are very similar. Namely, you have to look at them. They look almost the same, and so maybe the copyist kind of messed up as he's gone through. I think they're reaching on that one, but it is kind of a fun one to see. Different calendars, different symbolisms, things like that. Don't know. I mean, if that's the problem, there are other, I think, more pressing points that need to be talked about. Number 17, the King of the Jews. Isn't it interesting that the charge that's placed above Jesus is actually true, and that's why he died? I find that fascinating. Things. Criminals. Ooh, I can't even spell criminals. Criminals. That's a new word type thing, I guess. It's supposed to be criminals. Some of the older translation has thieves. It's more than just a thief. One of the favorite words Volz uses is a brigand, a gangster. I like that kind of too, a gangster. Revolutionaries doing things in violent means and stealing things as they do it. You can read there that one of a gloss is something that appears to be added to the text. In an old Latin manuscript, you can see the name Zolothon of Chamatha, and a pseudepigraphal book is one that claims to be true, but we believe it's not, and oftentimes was named for somebody, so that you would go, oh, if Tim wrote a book, we'd all read it, but if Jim wrote a book, you go, eh. So they put names of people there, and so the Acts of Pilate has names for them, and obviously, we don't know the guys' names. It's not that important, but it's interesting that somebody wanted to have names listed. There's some interesting things you can do if you look at number 23. about sitting at Jesus' right and left. Some of the folks who go through this go, well, you know, James and John asked to sit at Jesus' right and left, and now we have people sitting at right and left. That's interesting type things. I don't know. You can do lots with that. I guess the reason I wanted to point out there was, I don't think I talked about this last time. The sedale, I think that's how you say it, or a seat. You ever heard that there were seats on crosses in the first century? According to a couple of sources I read, there were little seats where the person could rest a little bit longer, but still not rest enough. It would make additional time for more suffering, is the way it seems to me. I never read that before. That was news to me as well, type things. 25, 26 are interesting because the whole thing about save yourself. Now, if you think about it, Satan would have loved Jesus to save himself, because if he saved himself, he wouldn't be saving you and me. And so it is, if you want to talk about the last temptation of Christ, there was a movie that was written off of a piece of fiction. To me, this would be the true last temptation of Christ. Come down from the cross, save yourself. You don't have to do this. But if he did, it would be terrible for you and me. 27, yeah. Leaders declare that if they see, they will believe. Yet throughout Jesus' ministry, the leaders have seen and not believed. And interesting as well, seems Mark especially emphasizes that faith precedes sight almost, so it's the exact opposite. And the last point there's not a conversion. I chose to use the word brigands because that's fun, of one of the gangsters, as Luke does. It's interesting that that's not listed as well. Doesn't say it didn't happen, but that was not an important thing for Mark. Do you have any other comments you want to talk about? Mr. Tim?
About the cross, we use it not to glorify the cross, but to know that because he hung on the cross and died for us, I think it was an awful instrument of his death, but for us, it's our salvation.
Yeah, and so that's why we wear crosses, but it's
Right.
interesting that this terrible, painful way is brought forward in that way.
But you use the example, why didn't we use an electric chair?
That's true,
something?
yeah.
But I think it's a reminder constantly.
Right, I agree with that, right. Anything else you want to talk about, or are you ready to go ahead? Chapter 15, starting in verse 33. Volz calls this the denouement. Anybody know what denouement means? I did look it up to make sure that I messed up. This is the definition that I found. The final part of a play, movie, or narrative in which the strands of the plot are drawn together and matters are explained or resolved. So everything comes to a head here, right? At Jesus' death. This is the point of the entire gospel here. Would you agree? This is where it stands. Okay, so here, we're in verse 33. When it was noon, please note that the actual text is when it was the 6th hour. So again, we're translating it as noon. Darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. Again, that would be the 9th hour. Darkness is interesting. Darkness is used it's showing how, I don't know, it's interesting how what do I want to say about that? Darkness, okay, I look down at my note. How dark, where did it become dark? Is it only there in that area, or is it the whole world? It's interesting that different folks try to make a point at different ways, that you can find that just the area itself was dark, or the whole world was dark at that. I don't know if it makes a difference, but it's an interesting thing to talk about. The pseudepigraphal, I kept finding references to pseudepigraphal. Gospel of Peter, again, Peter, we read that, but we don't think it's true, says that darkness covered all Judea, and so they're trying to say it was just over a certain point. darkness, sin, all of that's kind of thrown together there. And so it becomes dark. So we have 3 hours of darkness as Jesus is suffering. And at 3, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, which is translated, my God, why have you abandoned me? What does that say to you?
I was gonna say that, to me, that's confusing.
Confusing?
Well, I can't quite understand it.
Okay. Anybody have thoughts that you want to share on that? I can share my thoughts, but
I'd like you to.
I'll get there. Just give me a moment. I'm just giving other people a chance. Okay. Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. You can see the little notes over there. It is, and the transliteration is there for you, or the translated. Actually, the Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani is the transliteration of those words, and it does come from. The first thing I needed to say is he cried out. Now, the word there is important because it is bo'a'o, and it's to cry out, call, or shout. Now, you're going, okay, that's what it says. Why is that important? Because it's not a word it's a word which has hope attached to it. It is not a hopeless, nothing can help me. It's not that. Instead, it is one where there will be some hope that could come. It is not a cry of despair or hopelessness. Now look at what he says. Is Jesus, we say this is saying that Jesus is alone. He's been abandoned by God, right? That's what Jesus says. But he still is calling out to whom? He's calling out to God. So he continues to call that. The shout itself is in Aramaic. That's the transliteration there of the Aramaic. And it is translated into English for us there. It's not a plea for help. Instead, it's not a shriek of agony, despair, or hopelessness, but it's a call of someone who trusts in the outcome. There are other words that could have been used to make it instead of he cried out, the word bo'a'o. So I think it is important. A loud voice, this is interesting. It's a voice, a loud one, is what he's saying. And so he's making a loud sound, and people are paying attention to what Jesus is saying. I think it's important to see that Jesus says this, and as he's crying this out, there is some hope in it. Anguish. Remember in the Garden of Gethsemane in chapter 14, 33 and 34, Jesus talks about drinking the cup of the Father. Remember the judgment and all of that? And there are parallels in Isaiah 53 for all of this as well. But the emphasis is that he's beginning to take on himself alone the punishment that we should have had. And it is, it's very, very bad. But it's not a shriek. It's not a cry of dereliction in the sense of despair, but there behind it will be confidence in the ultimate victory. And that's all comes really from the references like in Psalms 69 of talking about God's faithfulness and all. This is interesting. This is the only saying from the cross that's recorded by Mark. Remember we talked about the 7 last words of the cross. It's interesting to ask the question. I don't know, I can't give you a reason why. Why is this the one that Mark chose to write? Why didn't he choose to write some of the others? I do not think that they were unknown to him. They would have been known. But is there something about this one, this cry of, I am alone, I am suffering alone? I remember preaching a sermon of God turning his back, God the Father turning his back. That's a traditional thing to say. and Jesus is suffering this all alone. But behind it, there is still some type of hope. It's not total despair. I mean, if you want to talk about total despair, the total despair person in this whole story is Judas, right? Because what did Judas do? He despaired. I guess he figured out what he did was wrong, and he chose to kill himself. That was one of the rabbit holes I went down this morning, right? And it came from thinking about what we did about Peter when he was, those 3 times he was speaking that he didn't know Jesus. The emphasis on he's facing the light. And I don't ever remember that. I always thought it was fire because that's how it's translated. But probably firelight is a better thing because remember the word there is the word for light. And so he's facing the light. And I'm interested in what commentators do with that to try to say that he still, he didn't walk away entirely from Jesus like Judas did. And here I think it's not that Jesus is saying, that he is alone on the cross, yes, but he sees that there still is hope, that God's plan is coming together right then for him. So that's what I'm trying to say here. I don't know. You want to talk more about that? Cindy, uh-oh, here we go. I'm in trouble now. Okay, Cindy says.
This is really, I'm going down the rabbit hole, okay?
Hey, I'm the only one that gets
You
to do
did
that.
during the sermon today, so.
I actually did twice.
Yeah.
I should be able to do 3.
There, you got one more time. So the Bible says that the penalty for sin is eternal separation from God, except for what Christ did. So here, when Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's obviously taking that punishment for us. Would we, do we view it as he was abandoned, forsaken by God? He was experiencing that separation from God the whole time he was on the cross? Just part of the time?
You want the best answer I can give you?
You don't know.
You're right.
Okay.
I'm not trying to wimp out. I don't know.
No, I'm just
don't know.
curious because for us.
Okay, but let me take that and turn that in a slightly different way. So think about it. Is Jesus God? So God abandons him. I mean, philosophically, your mind's going to go boom type thing because we're trying to figure out, I think the emphasis would be God, Father God, why have you done that? I believe that would be the best way to deal with that. But I don't know. I think it's at this point that Jesus is experiencing that. And we're 3 hours in now. And so I cannot imagine, remember, even if there's this little seat where you can kind of rest a little bit, the whole emphasis is to make you tired, to make it difficult to breathe. And I don't know about you, but difficulty to breathing. If you've ever had that, I've had that once and twice. And it's not a good thing. It feels terrible. And so when you try to push up and your legs don't have it and your arms can't pull up, it's a tough thing. So I think maybe it's coming to a head at this point, or he is beginning to see that. But I cannot tell you if it's not in anything I've never read anything about that. Sorry. I do want to read you a quote. This is from Lane, who writes this. The cry has a ruthless authenticity, which provides the assurance that the price of sin has been paid in full. Jesus did not die renouncing God. Even in the inferno of his abandonment, he did not surrender his faith in God, but expressed his anguished prayer in a cry of affirmation, my God, my God. And I like that reminder that it is to God is a prayer. So, but some people think he's calling Elijah. Tim.
Well, I've always felt that he wasn't cursing God, and we've all experienced frustration with dealing with a problem, and we think, God, are you really hearing my prayer? You're not cursing him. You're just saying, do I have to speak louder or what? But
Be more patient.
yeah, that
This is what I am experiencing at this moment. It feels like you have abandoned me. Yeah.
and we've all felt, or I that there are times where, you know, he didn't stop, God didn't stop loving me, didn't give up on me, but I gave up on myself and thinking that, you know, it's hopeless. But he knew better and knew that in time I would come around to that. You know, I went to say it last week in one of my spinal surgeries at the Mayo Clinic. They had to give me a lot of blood, and one of the blood transfusions caused my the airways to fill up, and I remember the only thing they were had me under sedation, of course, but they were quickly tried to get me back again conscious, and they had two what seemed like really massive orderlies came in, and they picked me up, and they were holding me by my feet, trying to get me to breathe, and saying, "Breathe, breathe," and I thought, I am trying to breathe, but it's a scary moment.
Yeah, it's scary. I'm sorry, you were having spinal surgery and they picked you up? And...
Oh, well, at that point, that if I didn't breathe, that they were going to...
Yeah, I guess if you can't breathe, it would be, okay. All right, interesting. So why did they think he's calling for Elijah? They believe Elijah would come. Remember Elijah, there's this thread that Elijah could come and help in a difficult situation like that. Eloi, Eloi, Eli, Eli. Some say the words that he said, you know, those two words look close to Elijah. I don't think so, but that's what some would suggest. So if they believe that he's calling from Elijah, notice it says a person ran, filled a sponge with sour wine, fixed it to a stick, offered him a drink, and said, interesting, the reason the weight's in parentheses and italicized is it was not translated in this, but it is actually in the text. It's wait. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down. Interesting that Jesus is offered this stuff. What's interesting is this sour wine. If you look at the words that it says there, it says closely resembling a mild modern wine vinegar. It's probably what it was similar to. And it's possible that Jesus did take this, and some say he's offered. It doesn't say that he actually drank it here, right? However, in John's Gospel, chapter 19, verse 30, it does indicate that he does. So that's in another text. It's not in this one. Although some try to make it say, tried to make him drink. So you can do that with the grammar, I guess, technically. But if he drank of this, it would make him more acutely aware of the pain and suffering. This is not like the wine laced with myrrh that would make less. But so if he did take this, the idea is to keep him awake as long as possible. Isn't that interesting? Instead of let the poor guy kind of go out and suffer that way, let's keep him alive as long as we can. Doesn't say, we don't know who the someone is. I would guess that's someone officially involved in the crucifixion. I don't think a bystander would say, hey, I just happen to have this stuff. But, you know, that's kind of weird to think about. So I would think it would be a Roman. Remember, part of crucifixion is to make it as bad as possible so that many people see it. So they go, I don't want to be like that. So they'll behave. So that could be part of it as well. It's interesting that Eli, Eli, it's either, you know, that's where they think maybe Elijah. So it's either misunderstood accidentally, or some suggest even on purpose to try to make more fun of Jesus type thing. Elijah, let us see if Elijah will come. Okay, here's my other note. I guess I said this. The offer of a sip of wine was intended to keep Jesus conscious for as long as possible. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down. I don't know. Jesus let out a loud cry. Again, it's a loud cry. The same thing, a sound, a loud sound. And this is different. This is unusual. As a person is dying from crucifixion, if you are having trouble breathing, it is hard to speak loud. And this is very unique. I think this is one of the reasons that the centurion says there's something different about this man, there's something different about this crucifixion. And actually also Pilate will say that because he asked the centurion, what do you mean? He's dead already, basically, right? Sometimes it took people 3 days to die. Can you imagine 3 days? We're talking about, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m.? Is that 6 hours, I guess? So that's very fast in the crucifixion time. Crucifixion, again, is designed to be as painful as possible, and I think there's an element of making it as long as possible. So you can see this person, if you happen to be going to work and having to go by that way every day, to see this and go, I don't want that. And interestingly, I've even read that oftentimes people were just left up there after they're dead and let the body decompose there or let the animals take care of it. I mean, as the final ultimate insult of we're not going to bury you because of the type of person you were. And so therefore, I mean, that's one of the worst things you can do to a person, and especially in that culture. Well, I think in our culture too, right? Not to leave somebody unburied. Well, look at all the efforts that are done if there's a terrible thing that happens to try to find remains and to inter those type thing. So, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting, that whole thing. So he breathed his last. Now that's interesting. Breathed his last. Ekpaneo. Yeah, and the P is kind of, I tried to listen to it, it's kind of there. To breathe out, to expire. So it means he's dying, right? Mm-hmm. Could it mean more? Could it mean more than that? He breathed out his spirit. One of the commentators goes off on his rabbit hole. This is his rabbit hole, not mine, but it's a very interesting one. I'm finding rabbit holes can be very interesting. That it's only after Jesus breathes out and is no longer alive that we have someone speak and say who he is. And so this commentator's emphasis was that Jesus breathed out the Spirit into the world, and the Spirit began to work in the heart of a centurion. Now, there may be a whole lot there, and you can say, it's gone too far. But it's an interesting argument, because of all the times in verse 39 is the first time we have someone, well, actually there are 3 times it says that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, or something like that. It's in chapter 1, verse 1, right? That's what Mark says. It's in Peter, here we go. It's when Peter says it, right? You are the Christ. Jesus says, who do people say I am? Who do you say I am? That's the first time we have it. You are the Christ. Some versions, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then over here, we have the centurion. This is the first time a non-Jewish person, this is the first time a Jewish person says it, unless you count Mark out. And then this is the first time a non-Jewish person says it. So isn't it interesting that it's the beginning, it's about halfway, and here at the end, the statement is made as well. And so the emphasis on breathing out, that the Spirit is now out in the world, beginning to move and go forth. It's an interesting thought. Might be too much, but you can play with that in your mind. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, you can go a long ways on that one. There are a few sermons you could come out of that, and people will go, huh, which sometimes is good to make people think. And also, and then in verse 38, here's another, and this is going to be rabbit hole-y type thing as well. The curtain. Which curtain is it? Apparently there are 2 curtains. There's a curtain separating the Holy of Holies from the rest, but there's a curtain farther out that separates the holy place so that you could not see in. And so the question is, which one is the one? It seems to be if it were the inside curtain, very few people would see it. So it appears to be the outside curtain. And the fun thing is what's on the outside curtain. Let me find that. Sorry, I got a lot of pages on this stuff. I left it there in case I needed to do it. Where did that go? I lost it. Really? Sometimes you get too much stuff. I'm going back, if I can find it. Open a Bible here. I'm going to find it quickly. Bible to Bible. Bible. I'm going to go back to Mark's Gospel, chapter 1. And I went verse, where'd it go? Baptism of Jesus. I'm going to read for you the baptism of Jesus. This is chapter 1, verse 9 and following. And those Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. When he came up out of the water, immediately, do you remember what happened? He saw the heavens being torn open and the Spirit of God descending upon him. Well, the interesting thing about this curtain is that there was, and this is from several sources, it's not just Bible sources, actually it doesn't say that in the Bible, that there was on this curtain, there is, where did it go? There's the zodiac, not the zodiac, but the heavens are on this. And so how does it tear? What does the text say? How does it tear? Interesting. It doesn't go zoop like this, but it goes how? From top to bottom. And so one of the rabbit holes you can go down is the heavens are rending, figurative heavens are rending again and opening up. And of course, what we usually do is we talk about how then this is direct access to God type thing there. But it's interesting that on this curtain were the heavens. And so you can make an emphasis about, this is the note I got. Therefore, as the temple veil tore, the heavens themselves, so representative, were figuratively and literally split. Thus the story begins and ends with the rending of the heavens. Kind of bookends here. That's a little crazy little point to make. And I also put this, I wanted to say this. As noted in this quotation, at the rending of the heavens, Yahweh himself, that's God, descends to be present. Notice the direction, namely from top to bottom, that this is his long-awaited eschatological coming. Volz likes to use that word. Though proleptically, as we have seen throughout this gospel, not God's full, complete, and final coming, and that God reveals himself with the fullest, the deepest, and the most important revelation of the cross and the confession of, okay. So that's an interesting rabbit hole. Thoughts there. So it opens, our emphasis is usually we have direct access to God here now, and there's something to that. And it keeps going on in verse 39. When the centurion who was standing opposite him, that's interesting. So Jesus is up there, the centurion is facing him. The emphasis is on facing him. So he can observe these things happening. He observed what Jesus said. He observed what Jesus did and did not do. He observed how Jesus is speaking with a loud cry. Verse 37, remember, we'll have to go to another gospel where it says, where Jesus says the whole thing of tetelestai, right? Which is translated as, it is finished, right? Not just I'm dying, but an emphasis of paid in fullness type thing. So all of that, Jesus is dying much differently than the average person. He's looking there as he breathed his last, again, that breathing out one's last breath, the emphasis of spirit possibly there as well. He said, truly this man was the Son of God. Now the note under verse 39 is important because the text there in the Greek is anthropos, man, this man, the hustos is this, the anthropos, the son, the man, truly, aletheis is the truly, this whole anthropos, this man, son, God, of God, was. So there's something missing there. The missing there is the definite article. And so This is Colwell's law. I think I used it wrong. Grammatically, there is no the definite article. Most believe it follows Colwell's law, which is this: a definite predicate noun that is placed syntactically before a copula, the verb be, or its equivalent, regularly omits the article. Now this guy, believe it or not, this Colwell, went through all of the New Testament Greek. He went through, as I remember, extra-biblical Greek of the same time to come up with this law, and he found all uses of this, and the word the is assumed to be used. Now, why is this important? What difference does it make if the centurion says, truly this man was a son of God and the Son of God? There's a lot of difference between definite and indefinite use there. But of course, others who, I think, in their own, going down their own rabbit holes are trying to take away a whole thing about divinity, because this could be a claim of divinity, right? They say that, he's like Caesar was the son of a god and all of this. I mean, there are lots of different ways that people try to do this. I think traditionally in the Christian church, for as long as I've been around, which is a lot of years, the emphasis was that this is a confession, that there's something very unique about this guy. And so the folks who did this little thing says the first person in the story to grasp Jesus' identity, the crucified Son of God, is the Messiah. So we have the claim here, we have claim of Messiah, and now the crucified Son of God is the Messiah. And that is a major emphasis of this fellow. This is a Roman centurion. What does it mean for him to say that this is the Son of God? That's a pretty big statement. He could be killed himself for that, because Caesar is God. And so he did not make that claim. He's doing something entirely different. So that's a pretty important thing, pretty important point. I believe that the should go there. I'll go along with Colwell. I'm not going to go through all of the Greek New Testament and find all of these cases where the verb to be is used in this case. Can you imagine doing that? They did this, and this is before all this computer searching stuff. It's a heck of a lot easier now. This is going through it page by page by page. I can't imagine that. But he got the rules named after him. Anything else on that? Was that enough, Mr. Tim?
Yeah, I remember my parents took brothers and I in New York City. I was in high school then, to see the robe, and that's one of the things that struck me the most was that centurion, knowing that if he was to say that, he could face death. And I can always remember that feeling. That, it helped me understand my relationship.
I want to read one thing. I highlighted this and I said, ooh, this is unusual and unique, so maybe I should mention this. Jesus maintained consciousness to his last breath. In the moment of death, an inarticulate cry burst from his throat. Well, we learn in other places that he was an articulate cry. The strength of the cry indicates that he did not die the ordinary death of those crucified who normally suffered long periods of complete exhaustion and unconsciousness before dying. So it was something very, very unique. We already did that. We did unusual, expiration. I don't want to do that. So we're at 40. You want to go ahead? Can I go ahead, or do you want to stop at that? There are also women watching from a distance. Who else was in the story of Jesus suffering and death doing something from a distance? Remember, it was Peter who followed from a distance. Same phrase type thing. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger and of Joseph, and Salome. So it's a question about who the middle one is. Some think that it's a reference to Mary, the mother of Jesus, but that depends on how you translate. And there are some different variant texts there. But some of the women are following. That's important, I think. In Galilee, these women followed him and took care of him. we learn in one of the texts, I think it's in Luke, that the taking care of is they help support financially. So it's the women who are supporting it. Thank you, ladies, for supporting Jesus' ministry. And I have my own chief financial officer sitting over here, so I have to be careful. So you know all that stuff. Okay. And many other women had come up with them to Jerusalem. It's interesting to me how the women are mentioned who were there more than the men. You know, I keep mentioning that. It's kind of fascinating to me as well. Second part. Interesting observation. If you count Greek words, I did not count English words. This was counted for me. Again, I don't like to count things. There are as many words used for Jesus' death as they are for his burial. Burial is quite detailed, interestingly. I mean, there are a lot of details not left there, but when I say quite detailed, I mean, there's a lot that it says. There are as many words, interestingly enough. And this part is entitled A Rich Man of Courage, and I think that's important to know. When it was already evening, because it was the day of preparation, that's an interesting word, parasuke, the day before the Sabbath. It would be sometime, remember, sundown to sundown. So it was already, it's coming, it's almost there. You got to get this done, especially because it's going to be a big Sabbath because we're coming up to Passover. Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent, so this guy's important, prominent, being rich as well, member of the Sanhedrin who was himself looking forward to the kingdom of God. We had talked about Nicodemus some, right? Nicodemus in John 3. Nicodemus will be talked about in the burial as well. Although that's in John's Gospel as well, I believe. He's not mentioned here, interestingly. But this fellow also was in the Sanhedrin. If he's looking for the kingdom of God, it would imply to me that he's not going to vote crucify Jesus type thing. So again, that goes back to what we talked about, that not everybody had to be there at that time. Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the Sanhedrin who was himself looking forward to the kingdom of God, came and boldly went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Boldly is tolmao, dare, to show boldness, to be courageous enough. Oftentimes what happened is that the corpses, the bodies of people who were crucified were not buried. I mentioned before that sometimes they were left on the cross to let the animals take care of them. Other times they were allowed to rot type thing. Sometimes they were just taken and thrown down. There are cases it shows where there were mass graves where kind of like we just throw these people because they're not important. But this guy is asking for the body. Now that takes a lot of boldness, I think, to do that. And he asked for it. He requested it. Pilate was surprised. Thamazo, he was marveled. He was astonished. Remember, in the trial, Jesus continued to astonish Pilate that he wasn't answering. There's something about Jesus. Even dead, Pilate is astonished because of things about Jesus, which is interesting. 3 days is not uncommon for somebody to be on a cross. 3 days. But here, no, not even that. Very, very quick. So summoning the centurion, he asked him whether he, that's Jesus, had already died. He's going to make sure, because he's, again, surprised. He's astonished. When he found out from the centurion, he gave the corpse to Joseph. Allowed him, this is an official granting. The word there implies that, interestingly enough. And so after he, that's Joseph, bought some linen cloth. Linen cloth we've run into before in this gospel from what context? Anybody remember? It was the night Jesus was captured. There's that little interesting comment about a young man who runs away after they grab him and he leaves behind the linen cloth. Interesting. Some people try to go down an interesting rabbit hole about that. I don't know where you go with that one. That seems to be a little more forced to me. But this would be a type of cloth, the cloth that's listed there. A sindon is used for burial. It's also used as a lovely table covering. So this would be a fine linen cloth. And you'll note it says he took him down and wrapped him in the linen. It leaves out a lot here, right? It doesn't go into details. If he's using a linen cloth, he probably washed the body as was usual, and there were some things placed upon. But again, we have a time restriction because it has to be done before Sabbath begins, which is at sundown. If Jesus died at 3, so I don't know, what do we have, 3 hours or so, maybe 4, depending on if it's a daylight savings time or not or something. I don't know, 3 to 4 hours. And he has to get permission and all of this. So there's lots of stuff going on there. Took him down and wrapped him in the linen, and he laid him in a tomb cut out of rock and rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. There are a couple of different types of tombs I've read. Let me find my notes. It appears, since this fellow was a fellow who was well off, rich, shall we say, that he had one of the better types of tombs. There were 2 types of rocks that were used to cover them, to enclose it. Some, on the less expensive tombs, it was just a rectangular rock that was placed there, only about 500 pounds. So it's not too hard to move. I'm going only about 500 pounds? That's going to take a lot to move it. But you have to understand that the round rocks, which were I don't want to say common, which existed primarily in this time frame, interestingly enough, were less common, and they could weigh 3,000 pounds. So if it's designed in a way so you pull something and the rock kind of rolls to cover it, that's why the women are going to say, who's going to move the stone away? Because 3,000 pounds is pretty hard, and it's going to be kind of on an incline, it appears, to move it, or even just to roll that thing. But the richer folks would have it. So on the less fancy tombs were interesting because they were smaller. There were several chambers cut in so after there's a kind of like a table, if you will, or a location to place the body. After the body rots, you take the bones and put them in what's called a bone box, an ossuary, and then those would be put in one of the slots. And so for the average person, you would have a tomb, a family tomb, where there would be several bone boxes there. But it's thought that this is a much larger tomb where you can actually stand up in it, perhaps, and that there would be place for one. And so that could be what this is, because remember, they rolled the stone away. They did not push it away, so it is done in a different way. Cut out of rock. It's also interesting, I was reading that most times the tombs were often built, you built a tomb, cut out in a place, in a quarry where they had done some rock work before. I don't know, that thing. Interesting. So, and the last thing that I found interesting is in verse 47, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph. Now again, that could be Mary, Jesus' mother, perhaps, were watching where he was laid. The word we're watching, theoreo, emphasis is to see with attention. Now I think that word is used specifically there because what happens next? They will go to the tomb. So they were paying attention to where this place was, where Jesus was buried. And so one of the first things that is said about the resurrection is the women went to their own tomb, right? Well, this word seems to imply that they knew where this tomb was. They had been paying attention and they saw where the thing was. And so they knew where he was laid. And that's important because the story continues with Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Jesus. There are, several other women coming to the place where he was laid. And so they had been there, at least two of them had been there, and they knew where this place was. Again, there's a lot of detail in there, and there's not a lot of detail, if you will. There's a lot of words talking about this process, there are about as many here as actually in the section that we just looked at in the death of Jesus. At least in Greek, it's within 4 words of one another. And so it's interesting the things that are included and not included. I know in biblical studies they say, don't make so much emphasis of what's, something that's not there doesn't mean, you can't make a judgment on that. But I'm interested in why are certain things there and why are certain things not there. Now, the why questions are the ones that are the hardest to answer, of course. And my usual answer, as Cindy knew already, was going to be, I don't know. But I think it's interesting to ask why. The only thing that he has Jesus say on the cross, I find that interesting, is, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. That's the only thing that he has, is that he reports that Jesus says. Not to say it's the only thing Jesus said. I think he said all those things. I'm not saying that, but it's the only thing Mark chooses. And I just wonder why. Again, I can't answer that question, but it's fascinating. Went a long ways. Used a lot of words to talk about just a few words. Mr. Tim.
I just thought of something, is the tomb cutting the site out of rock, is that anything to do with the mausoleums that we used to see?
I'm sorry, with the what? With the mausoleum?
Mausoleums that we would see in older cemeteries?
As I understand it, they're designed as a place, the first thing you place a body in there. In Jewish circles, they were not embalmed in the same way that they were done in Egyptian circles. And so the emphasis is the body will decompose, right? And so that there are only the bones that are left, and then those are placed in a, quote, bone box, and those are placed someplace and kept there. And there are many, many, many bone boxes that have been discovered over time in that. I'm thinking of Lazarus. Lazarus had been in the tomb how many days when Jesus got there? 4 days. That's kind of, there are 2 emphases on that. First of all, it means he's dead, right? Because it's not, he's just kind of, I always think about that, Cindy, when Cindy was teaching a class and we were in this little church in Rochester, the kids were out, they were talking about death and burials. And so one of our members worked at a funeral home, and what I remember is saying that they were sticking a guy and he moved because he wasn't dead, because they're going to put that the thing in to get blood out and put whatever they put in, embalming fluid. Is that correct? Am I close?
Then they saw the blood beading in the vessel and realized he wasn't dead.
So he wasn't dead. So I don't know. Judy wants to say.
When we were in Israel, along the roadside, well, and again, roads were built later, we did see a similar where the stone would be rolled, and it was a disc, or like a millstone type. And here it said it was in a trap. But then when we were in the Garden of Gethsemane, it was more of a tomb setting. It was rocks, square rocks, and you could walk down, and then you went into the tomb, and then they had like a bed-like thing that they would be put. So we did see the 2 different types.
Yeah, the more common one is the smaller one, if you will, where it's not as high, and kind of those were more designed for one person burial, it appears, but where there's a location, kind of like a bed, if you will, where the person is placed, and then several slots or locations where they would put these. So it would become a family plot.
Right.
I guess the best thing I can think of, I think in New Orleans, they do not bury, at least they have not buried people underground for many years. They were above ground because of the water thing. And so there would be a building, if you will, and that would become a family type thing. And so these were family type things. But again, it's interesting that Jesus' body was asked for by a man who is not a family member, and he is not one of the apostles. He apparently is somewhat of a hanger-on in some way, but the person who would be most likely to get the body in this type of case would be a family member. And that no family member claims. None of the apostles go to claim. there is, I would call him a disciple or someone who is searching in that way, but he's the one that asks. And I think it's because he is someone who is of known quantity. He, like me, going into the White House and trying to see somebody and go, not you, but if you're somebody important, then maybe you can get in there. So he was able to get a hearing and was able to receive the body. And so that's kind of different too. So there are a lot of differences in Jesus' death, in Jesus' burial. All of these are unique. And so part of it was that it's so unique how Jesus died, just the physical way he died and all of that. But that's what made it so unique here, that this fellow would say that this is the Son of God. And again, I'm going with the thing saying the is assumed, because that's just was the most common thing in that's viewpoint.
That was his tomb, wasn't it?
I'm sorry?
That was Joseph's tomb, wasn't it?
Yeah, Joseph of Arimathea.
I mean, he had built that for himself.
We believe that, yes, it had not been used before. The implicit, I don't think it says it here, but elsewhere it says no one had ever been buried in that before. Yeah. Okay. Well, we're out of time. We're out of time. Got to go to another service. So a short prayer as we close. We say, Dear Jesus, we thank you that you did stay on the cross, that you knew that even though you were suffering and dying alone, that you knew that hope was not lost. But by staying on the cross, you paid off the debt of all of our sin. And we thank and praise you for that news, that truly good, wonderful news for us. And help us now then, as we live in the time after the resurrection, to know that you live. And because you live, through faith in you, we can have life, true life with you now, and life with you for all eternity. We ask this in your most precious name. Amen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.